Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Spotlight. I'm Mike Kenichi, and if you're listening to this theme song right now and you followed TV throughout the 60s, 70s, reruns in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, you definitely know this show. It was, of course, the successful My Three Sons, which lasted 12 seasons, 5 seasons on ABC, 7 seasons on CBS, and the gentleman we have today, he was a fixture on that show. He is just one of two actors from that show to play on all 12 seasons. He was the youngest son of Fred Douglas for the first 5 seasons, and then the last 7 seasons, he was the middle child playing Chip Douglas. It is my honor to introduce to you the one and only Stan Livingston. And Stan, I want to thank you for coming on today. It's a real honor.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
So, Stan, I'll tell you, man, you kind of came onto the scene in acting when TV was really starting to take off. I mean, the 50s, I think I Love Lucy was the first sitcom to enter the homes of TVs. So, I mean, you really kind of bursted on the scene when TV was making a big run. So, just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, there was a lot of good stuff. Even before My Three Sons, it was on TV. Besides Lucy, I don't know if you're familiar with the Amos and Andy show, but that was
Yeah.
spectacularly funny and kind of ahead of its time. There was also The Honeymooners. How do you beat that?
Yeah.
It's still playing. What is it, 7 years later? So,
Yeah.
so yeah, there was some great TV in those days, and different format. And gosh, when we take a look at it now, even from 20 years ago, I'll look at 1 inch tape and go, "Oh my God, it's awful! It's so grainy and whatever." But that's what we were used to, unless you went to the theater and saw a movie. But some great shows, and yeah, I was very lucky to be a part of that. I started out doing TV shows and made the rounds as a kid actor, and lucked out a little bit later in the late 50s because of a couple things that I had done. Started getting movies, and yeah, the movies, added a little more luster to my career and a few more really great credits on my resume. So, yeah, by 1960, when I started My Three Sons, I was a pretty well-known child actor in Hollywood, and I guess you could say I was in demand.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, Stan, you started when you were like 4 or 5 years old, right?
Hmm.
There was like you kind of something, I don't want to say fell into your lap, but you were able to get this small part that kind of like took you to bigger things eventually. But talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's what you find out if you're an actor of any age. Everything that you do generally leads to something else. It may not happen right away, but everything is all linked. Every time I look at it, and tell professional actors that, or people that are trying to become actors, everything you do is like laying down a little dot. And eventually those dots all kind of link together and link to other things. And it's amazing how that happens. And you really can't be aware of that until you've been in the industry 10, 20, or in my case, gosh, 65 years of how all that stuff linked together like a web, which in the beginning, every time you did a job, you figured, well, that's my last job. I'll probably never be hired again or never sent out on anything. And believe me, that does happen to actors. But yeah, I, started out like most actors as an extra. I did extra work at first, which means I did not have any dialogue. I wasn't a member of the Screen Actors Guild. I was just one of a bunch of kids. And yeah, for some reason I stood out. I don't know whether it was my look or I was pretty precocious and outspoken and, gave the people who were measuring me, I guess, as a child actor to see if I had what it took, saw something in me and gave me more work. And eventually those extra jobs led to a real job, which for me, it happened on Ozzie and Harriet. That show was always populated by a bunch of little kids in addition to Ricky and David, who were, getting older. They were probably in their mid-teens or late teens. So Ozzy had the great idea of, having little neighborhood kids as part of the show. And I became one of those. And first couple shows I did, I didn't have any lines, but I was in another show where they called me back, and he must have had his eye on me or something, and came up to me in the course of shooting and said, "Could you say this line of dialogue?" And he told me what to say, which was, "Sure is mighty good camping in there, Mr. Nelson." And he told me, "I'm going to put a piece of tape on the floor. And when you get to this spot right here, don't look down at the tape, look right at me and say that line and then go off that way." And so I did it, and we did it a couple times. And I guess he was satisfied and wanted to do it one more time, move the camera in a little closer. And guess what? I got my close up. And anyway, at the end of the day, he came up to my mom and said, "Hey, I'd like to have Stanley back again. Could you please leave your contact information with my secretary in the front office?" And true to his word, a couple months later, he called me back and I did another episode and then another episode. And those all mounted up. And over probably from late 1956 to early 1970, I did about, I don't know, somewhere between 15, 20 shows for the Nelsons on Ozzie and Harriet. And the reason I left was between the work I did for the Nelsons, I started doing movies. I was in a movie called The Bonnie Parker Story, which was an early version of Bonnie and Clyde that AIP made, and that was double billed with Machine Gun Kelly in movie theaters and in the drive-ins, and it did fairly well, and which led to Rally Around the Flag Boys, which was a movie starring Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward, which I just watched. I don't think I'd seen it in 20, 30 years, but I watched it about a week ago. And yeah, it was fun to watch. And, earliest movie that I had, some pretty good dialogue in. Played Paul Newman's son and Joanne Woodward's son. And in between that, I did a TV pilot for Jackie Cooper called Skippy.
Yeah.
And I got hired on that. And that was really my big break because I was the star of that. My name was above the title. And literally, I would say I was in 90% of the scenes with the other half of the dialogue. And although the pilot didn't sell, it was a really good film piece on me. And, in those days, we didn't have what is commonly referred to today as your reel. You have a resume, you have a reel. The reel back in those days was actually a reel. It wasn't a piece of videotape on a cassette. It wasn't a DVD, and it wasn't file based. It was actually a reel of film, and the way you showed it was it would be sent either to casting people or to producers, so they could see your work if you had anything worthwhile showing. So this became a really good showpiece for me. It got me Please Don't Eat the Daisies, which was another movie I did that starred Doris Day, David Niven. And probably the best thing it got me was shown to the producers who were searching for some kid actors for a new TV series to star Fred MacMurray called My Three Sons. And they saw it, and the very next day I got hired to play the youngest son, Chip Douglas. So, yeah, that's what I'm saying. All these little things lead to somewhere else, or people tell people about you, or just a reel of film can be the bridge to the next job. So yeah, did My Three Sons. We did the pilot, and who knew it was going to go for 12 years and 380 episodes, making it the second longest running sitcom ever on TV. Well, I was going to say primetime TV anyway.
Yeah, definitely a great show, and we're going to get to that more in a few minutes. But just want to correct myself. I initially said Fred Douglas, but it was Steve Douglas. It was Fred MacMurray, the actor. So I just want to correct that. But let me ask you this, Stan. I always am fascinated by people like yourself who were kid actors because I'm thinking about this. You still got to go to school, do schoolwork. How were you able to do that? I mean, did you have to have a tutor when you were a kid? You're on this show that, is very demanding. You got to be there probably Monday through Friday. Yeah. How did you manage that?
Well, that whole part of my career was probably the most hellish part of being in show business. Most of the kid actors either had tutors that taught them at home, or they would go to a school in Hollywood, which was called the Hollywood Professional School, and it catered to children in the industry who were on various TV shows. You would go there at 9 o'clock, and you would only be there for 3 hours to do your schooling, just like it would be on a set, and you had the rest of your day free. There was even musicians, I guess, who were underage, meaning under 18. I think it was David Marks went there one of the original Beach Boys. So
Yeah.
that school was populated. I mean, that's the only reason I wish I would have gone there. I knew a lot of the people already from either working with them or they were working on My Three Sons, but it would have been cool to hang out together. My parents had it in their head that we should go back to public school for whatever reason. And we were like, really? And I knew what that was going to be, just because after the series started, you have to remember in those days there was three networks and you probably had 40, 50, 60 million people a week watching you. So there came a point where I couldn't go anywhere without people, you're getting mobbed wherever you went. If we go out to dinner, if you went to the market, you'd cause a scene and people want your autograph. In those days, thank God they didn't have cameras with them. But anyway, yeah, it was kind of crazy. I'd go back to school, and when it first all kind of broke for me, I was going to where I started elementary school, which is Vine Street Elementary School on Vine Street in Hollywood. And I was just a kid that went there. I didn't stick out. I'm like everybody else. Nobody particularly knew me, and I was just, I was lucky to get picked to play kickball or something. But anyway, all of a sudden, I came back to the school. This is when I was doing Ozzie and Harriet. People would be looking and going, "Were you on TV?" And then I go, "Yeah." And I think it was just in those days, it was so new that people couldn't figure out why I was and they weren't, or how I got picked to do that. So I was like an anomaly there. And then when My Three Sons broke, I was still going to the same school. And it was very difficult because I'd go back to school and, after a couple hours or a day, everybody knew I was going to school there. And, all these kids would mob me and, want to be my friend or beat me up, one of the two. And all the girls wanted me. So that was kind of crazy because I was only about 9 years old, so I probably didn't even like girls yet. I wanted to play kickball and baseball and stuff. And
Yeah.
it's like, get away from me. um, so that was kind of weird. And it even got weirder when I got to junior high. So the way it was done is while we were shooting, we had a tutor on the set, and I would go to school. You're mandated to go 3 hours a day. That's the rule, and you had to put in 3 hours worth of time. You didn't always get to do 3 straight hours. You basically, I would be filming scenes while I was going to school, and sometimes it would take 8 hours to get those 3 hours of school in, because I could be in a lot of scenes, and I'd go back in and out of the classroom. And the other rule was I had to be not disturbed for at least 15 minutes. So there was always an assistant director right outside the door, like, looking. And the second it was 15 minutes, he'd knock on the door and go, "Okay, we need you on the set." And I'd have to go back out and do the scene and then come back. And then some days I'd come to work and I wasn't in the first couple of scenes. And sometimes they'd have problems, and I wasn't even in the scene till noon. So by then I got all my schooling in for the day, the 3 hours. When we weren't shooting, January, well, at least in California, when we were on the semester system, the first semester ended, went from September to the end of February, and we finished shooting around mid-December, sometimes at the end of December, and I would go to school at the school teacher's house. She was the welfare worker preparing me for school. And I'd put my 3 hours in at her house and then go home. And then come February, that's when I had to face the music and go back to public school. And junior high, it was, believe me, it was so different than, going to elementary school, because all these little kids think they're adults. And now seventh grade, everybody's smoking and,
Yeah.
wise guys and a lot of fights. And God knows how many fights I was in when I was going to Bancroft Junior High. Just, either, like I said, people liked you, or, people just come up behind you and just like push you like into the lockers or trip you or say insulting things, not to say everybody's like that. There was more people that, really just wanted to be your friend. And, not that they were your real friends. Some of them became that, but, yeah, well, it was very awkward. And, after a week or two, it would settle down and people knew I was there. And, I was no longer this human oddity walking up and down the hallways,
Yeah.
waiting for somebody to take a swing at me, So, I learned to deal with it. And in a way, although it was torturous when I was doing it, all through 3 years of junior high, it was kind of less so in high school. You know, as you mature, I think people kind of got out of that goofy phase you're in junior high. Um, but it really kind of prepared me for dealing with real people in the real world, you know, which is not all, you know, it's not exemplary. So, you know, it's not going to be a place where everybody likes you, and it's not going to be a place where everybody hates you. It's a mix of everything, and you have to learn how to deal with it with your social skills. And you know, I feel I learned a lot of social skills by going back to public school, you know, and dealing with people or threats or you know people that are uncommonly nice to you, and then you realize, oh well, they're just my friend because I'm on TV. This isn't a real friend, and you know you had to learn how to distinguish between people and read character and you know read who people were. So it kind of taught me a lot of lessons that had I gone to Hollywood professional school and just hung around with people who were exactly like me that were on TV and famous. I don't know what kind of experience that would be. I mean, it probably would have been okay too, but the other, I'm glad I did it. Yeah, I'm glad I went to public school.
Yeah, Stan. One of the things we've seen over the years, I don't believe it happened to you, and it. I think sometimes people overrate it and they think it happens to everybody, but it has happened to a few child actors over the years.
Mhm.
Um, what do you think happens where like they go through the struggles as adults? Do you think it's the fame they have as children or the expectations that are put on them? Because I mean, you see it, you know, over the years, they would be successful
Mhm.
child actors and maybe not as successful as they like when they become adults. So, what do you think that problem is? Like, why do you think it was different for certain people?
Yeah. A lot of it is luck. A lot of it is just the industry itself. And then a lot of it is the person and how they react to what's going on around them. Yeah, I knew a lot of, you know, kid actors had very difficult times when their, you know, fame ended or wasn't as huge as it was at one time that they, yeah, had a hard time dealing with that. I mean, that's the part of, I think, being an actor, you really have, if you can get over that really fast, it's all the better. If you're hung up on your fame and measuring your worth by you know how much people like you or reacting to you, that it's such a false thing because like I was saying, those aren't real friends. People coming up, they're just people that saw you on TV, and
Yeah.
in those days, that was really an anomaly. But you know, if you're a kid, you don't know how to handle it, and the parents of kids didn't know how to handle it either. It's just this thing you did, and it was very unique, and there's no book to tell you how to handle this or what to do or how to handle it if it ends. You know, most of the people I knew were on TV series. Um, Unfortunately, their TV series, you know, lasted 3 years, 5 years, and then that was that. And they had a little bit of fame and worked for a while. You know, they would people that had their own series. Like the guy was on Dennis the Menace, Jay North. You know, he came over and did two or three My Three Sons episodes. I'm trying to think. Tony Dow, who was on Leave It to Beaver. You
He
know,
did
so
a couple.
you,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, and there's a lot of kids that did that had their own shows, were a part of another show, and you know, I think they were probably the healthiest. Where it really gets horrible is when you turn about 16, 17, if you're a kid actor, because the industry really prefers to work with 18-year-olds because they can work them all day and all night if they want to. Where if you're 17 years old, it's the same rules as if you were 7 years old. You can only work, I think it's 6 hours a day. You're supposed to have an hour for lunch, and somehow there's got to be enough minutes in the day that add up to another hour where you're not being called to the set. You know, they call rest time. At least it was back then, and you know that's how we did it. But you know, so a lot of these actors were you know famous and had careers, and all of a sudden it just stopped. And you know, if you're that age, you think you did something wrong, and there's nobody really in those days. And I don't even, to my knowledge, there's nothing like that even now to counsel children and especially the parents. The parents are usually the part of the equation that's really corrupted when it comes to you know their kids. You know they don't want their kids to have another life or a life off screen They want them to be working and bringing money in. And a lot of parents took their kids' money and spent it on
Yeah.
themselves. The kid turned 18. They didn't have a savings account. They didn't have a Coogan account. And, they may have worked quite a bit and got to be 18, and there was literally nothing there for them, financially speaking. For me, I did a series. So if you had a series, it was actually mandated that they had to take a certain percentage of my money and they put it into, I believe it was Series E bonds, which are probably the worst investment in the world, but that's what they did. And it would sit there until you came of age when you're 21, or unless you're, you know, emancipated at 18 back then. Now it would be 18 years old, you would have access to whatever you'd saved up. Fortunately, my parents chose to put more than the minimum amount that they were required to do in there. So I ended up with most of my money. And, when I was 18, I had a nice little nest egg waiting for me. And, I basically didn't leave an ostentatious lifestyle. I guess I could have gone right out and bought a Rolls Royce, but I didn't. Or bought a big mansion in Beverly Hills. I guess I could have done that there. But, I bought a car and I bought a modest house. That's what I did. And I was able to sustain that even when I wasn't on, my 3 cents, because it wasn't, spending money crazily. I also had a business manager who kind of looked after me, and he's one of the few business managers who didn't rob their own clients. I've heard horror stories too of people that did make money, much more money than I was making. Got a business manager who, you find out 5 years, 10 years later, you have nothing. The business manager stole it all. So there's that trap too. But I was lucky. I was on a show, and it was a conservative show. The people on the show, the production manager, the producer, Fred MacMurray, they really looked out for us, and made sure we weren't being overworked or no kind of abuse on the set. And, they were always there. There was almost like having 3 or 4 other parents looking after you. So I feel very fortunate to have been in that scenario and had to come out of that. And it allowed me later to impart all this knowledge to other people.
And Stan, you talked about this a couple minutes ago, and I'm glad you brought it up. You talked about Tony Dow being on a couple episodes. You talked
Mm-hmm.
about how you were on a couple episodes of Dennis the Menace and stuff like that. And what I really liked back then, because you didn't see it as much in the 80s and 90s as you did in the 50s, 60s,
Mm-hmm.
70s, is you could be on a successful series and you still did other things. So we saw Jerry Mathers or Tony Dow and different things. We saw you on Ozzie and Harriet, then My Three Sons came, but then you still occasionally showed up on Ozzie and Harriet. So we got to see these child actors do different things. And I thought that was always cool because you got to see them play kids, but play different parts. And I really enjoyed that part.
Well, for me, it was actually a little bit different. Because I was on the series, I wasn't allowed to do other TV shows during that period of time. So for 12 years, I mean, when I'm talking about my peers, they did because their shows ended and there was no restriction on them.
Yeah.
And I always thought, looking back, I didn't realize until I, just, well, not that long ago, but a while ago, looked at it and said, how come I wasn't in all these other TV shows? I should have been in all these shows. And then I remembered I couldn't do them because of My Three Sons. With the production company would not allow it. They were afraid you'd go onto a show. For instance, we had Chevrolet as a sponsor. That if you got on a show that was sponsored by Ford, they didn't want that to happen. Or Pontiac was one of our sponsors. So again, or Hunt's Ketchup. They could have had a bottle of Heinz ketchup there, and it would really cause some consternation in the executive office. Hey, this guy shouldn't be doing that. Hey, why? He should be eating Quaker Oats. He's eating Kellogg's cereal. So just to make sure nothing like that ever happened, we were forbidden from doing other TV shows. So I missed this whole 12-year period where I'm sure I would have worked on tons and tons of TV shows. There's this hole, a 12-year hole, where my friends were, getting a credit here, a credit there, and it probably amounted to maybe 50, 60 credits over a 10-year period of time, which would have been considered a lot. Well, what I got in return was I was in 380 half-hour episodes of My Three Sons. So that's how I finally had to reconcile it in my own brain. I did a lot more work, but it was all on the same show. But the thing that I was allowed to do was some feature films. So, in between, if we could fit it in the time frame, there was only about a 3-month window of opportunity there for me to do other projects. So I did X-15 with Charles Bronson and Mary
Yeah.
Tyler Moore. The director was Richard Donner. I did How the West Was Won. In that one, I think it was George Papard, and Carolyn Jones was my mother. I got to meet everybody working on the movie, and hanging out with like John Wayne or Henry Fonda. I'm trying to think, Gregory Peck, all the people that worked in that movie, and we had Henry Hathaway as the director. And when he got ill, we had John Ford, I think, for a week work, so I can actually say I worked with John Ford. So all these illustrious directors who were all these cantankerous old coots, man. They were really difficult to work for because they were used to cussing and swearing at people. And I was like a 12, 13, maybe 14-year-old kid. And I wasn't used to having somebody curse me out when I was working.
Yeah.
And that took some getting used to too. I think it hurt my feelings at first. And I think it was one of the crew guys came up to me. He said, "Listen, son," he goes, he doesn't mean that. That's just what he does. That's just how he acts when he's on the set. And when he's not on the set, he doesn't do that. And you just have to, turn the other cheek and let him do it. It's nothing personal. And it finally got through to me. It wasn't, because I got to know Henry a little bit off stage. He took me to lunch one day after being particularly savage to me during the shoot. And we drove into Prescott and had lunch. And, it was like being with some guy who's brutally beating you up. And then 5 minutes later, I got the same guy at the table. And now he's acting like he's Santa Claus. And I'm like, what's with this guy, man? He's like crazy. But he was really nice. And I remember we left the restaurant. And I said, hey, I wonder if they got like a toy store in this town. So he asked around, found out there was a toy store a couple blocks away. And I remember he said, let's go in there. We went in and he said, why don't you pick something out? And, part of me is like, oh, that's cool. But then I'm like, I don't really want this guy spending money on me. What's that all about? And I just felt kind of awkward. So he asked me what I like to do. And I said, well, I was out in the desert. And I found some, arrowheads, and I found some really cool rocks. So he said, well, look at that. He goes, there's like a whole rock collection up there. Would you like to have that? And it was this showcase. It was about 3 feet high, and it was like a book where you could close it. And each side was probably 2 feet wide. And it must have had about 20 shelves with all these little gems and, like fool's gold and geological samples in it. So he says, let's get that. And I think that thing was about $200, and which in 1963 or four, whenever that was, would have been a huge amount of money. And he just whipped out the cash, paid for it, and we carried it back to the car and got back to the set. And I thought, well, I finally bonded with this guy, so he'll probably let me alone now. And so anyway, I was in the schoolroom, finished the school. I got called out to work, and came to the set, started doing something. All of a sudden, he's like, cursing me out again. And I was like, I thought we were friends.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just how it was. The guy was right. He just liked to do that on the set, and he liked to F with people.
Wow, that's crazy. So talk to me, Stan, about how the audition for Chip Douglas came. Did you audition for somebody else, or I mean, was
No, I
that?
didn't even have to really audition. I went in to meet the people, but that was as far as it went. I never had to read.
Oh, wow.
It was all because I had done this TV pilot for Jackie Cooper, which was another strange thing how that came about. That came about because I was doing Ozzie and Harriet, and you're on the soundstage all day, 8 hours, and a lot of times I wasn't working. They'd be shooting other scenes that wouldn't need me for maybe an hour or two. And so I'd, wander around, go off our soundstage, stage 5, and maybe go over to the next one. And I realized I had a horse there. So I went over because I was taking horseback riding lessons at Griffith Park then. So I was really interested in the horse. And trainer was a really nice guy, and I followed him out a couple times. A couple times he put me up on the back of the horse, and I got to ride out on it. And they had a little makeshift stall in the back of that stage. And, he showed me how to brush the horse down and, how to feed it, and he had carrots. Let me give the horse carrots. Yeah, well, I didn't know it. The horse was Mr. Ed. They were shooting Mr. Ed there, and I'm just thinking horse is all I knew, and I didn't really watch that show, so I didn't know what Mr. Ed even was. And then across from stage 5, there was another stage, and at lunch hour they'd open the door up to air it out, and people would go to lunch, but there was a trainer there who had a dog who was on the show. It was a basset hound. And I didn't watch that show either, but I liked the dog, went over and played with it, met the trainer, a guy named Frank Ian. And he was really nice. He let me like play with the dog and would show me how to do hand signals and, you know, basically you give him the dog goodies when he would do his tricks. And one day, this guy, I could see him kind of looking at me while I was there, and I thought, "Oh God, I'm probably in trouble or something." So this guy comes up to me, and he started talking to me. I had to stand up and talk to him, and he goes, "Well, what's your name?" And I stuck my hand out. Stanley Livingston, nice to meet you. And anyway, we stood there talking, and I guess he was impressed with my maturity, even though I was 7 years old at the time. And so he said, "Well, where's your mom?" And I remember I said to him, "Am I in trouble?" And he goes, "No, no, you're not in trouble, son." He goes, "But I would like to meet your mom." So I said, "Well, she's on the sound stage across the way." So I said, "Come on, I'll take you." So he followed me over to stage 5. I walked up, said, "Mom, this guy wants to meet you." And anyway, I quickly scurried away because I figured I was in trouble. That's why he was asking to see my mom. And so the two of them, I saw them sitting there talking for about 15, 20 minutes. And my mom looked kind of strange look on her face. So I didn't know what was going on. And then he left, and I didn't want to inquire about it, so I didn't. But what happened was about 3, 4 months later, this guy, in the meantime, had written a television pilot for me to star in. And the guy was Jackie Cooper, who was,
Oh, wow.
besides
Yeah.
Shirley Temple, the most famous child star ever. Well, he was about 30, 33 by then. And he was the guy who was the producer and director of the show across the way, which was called The People's Choice, about him and his wife. And they had a dog, and the dog talks. Unlike Mr. Ed, whose mouth moved, this dog, his mouth didn't move, but you could hear his thoughts. And he'd always have these real facetious things to say and insulting things to say. And, that was the conceit of that. But anyway, yeah, December 1958. I had just turned 8 years old, shot this pilot for Jackie Cooper, who directed it and produced it. And it was called Skippy, which was based on a movie that he did when he was about, I think he was 9 years old or 10 years old. And it was a movie that was shot in 1934. Uh, I know the director won the Academy Award. I think the movie, I know it was nominated. I can't remember if it won or not. But Jackie Cooper, who was the star of it, actually won the Academy Award as Best Actor at the age of 8 or 9 years old. And to this date, he still remains the youngest actor in a lead role to have won an Academy Award. And so, it was kind of a little bit of a pedigree having worked for him, and it got edited. Unfortunately, well, I'd say unfortunately. Fortunately, the pilot didn't sell. The reason I say that is I was under contract to Jackie. I think it was a 3-year contract in case the series went. And I think he ended up creating another series for himself in the interim. That People's Choice went off the air, and he created another series called Hennessy for himself. And I think I don't know whether he was just getting resistance and selling the show or whether he just kind of wanted to move on to something else. So meanwhile, I'm entangled with him, and I'm still working, and he would let us borrow the film reel. As I was saying, that was my demo reel back then, and show it to people, and I would get work. And my agent at the time borrowed the reel and rented a theater after midnight and rented the projectionist, and she would show it to people. And somehow it fell into the hands of the casting person that was responsible for the casting of My Two Sons, who got the film again and screened it for the producers. And that was it. I got hired. I went in to meet everybody, but based on the job that I did on that particular piece, they didn't need to see me acting because I literally had to do everything on that show. It was everything from carrying the show to I had some major emotional scenes and crying scenes. So, they knew I was, I guess, worth my salt and just hired me based on that.
Yeah. And think about this, Stan. I mean, talk about your career on that show and your character and stuff like that. You start off as the youngest child, then you eventually become the middle brother. But really, fans got to see Chip Douglas go from a young kid to an adult, which doesn't happen a lot. I mean, unless you do the reboots and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You basically fans saw Chip Douglas grow up on this show. I mean, they watched him as a little kid. And I'll
Mhm.
tell you what, think about this for your first big, you know, big break. You work with actors like Fred MacMurray, who had done so many films, and then William Fraudley, who was so successful in I Love Lucy, and he did so many things. So you're getting to work with two extraordinary actors on this show. So, I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better start to your career.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and with the movies I did, Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward,
Yeah.
Doris Day, David Niven, Dorothy Provine, who was quite hot actor in her day. She didn't have a career that expanded out over decades, but she was touted to be the next Marilyn Monroe. She might look better than Marilyn Monroe when I look at that movie. I'm like, wow, she was really a babe. Yeah, Charles Bronson.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate with the people that I got to work for. The director of Rally Around the Flag Boys was Leo McCarey, one of the biggest directors ever. He's the guy that put Laurel with Hardy originally. So without Leo, there would have been no Laurel and Hardy. Yeah, so there's some Richard Donner. I did X-15 with him, and we kind of stayed friends. And even though I was a kid, I'd run into him at things. And then later, when I was about, I think might have been 24, my agent called me to go on an audition for a TV movie that was going to star, who was it? David Hartman. And I went in, and it was the story of a school teacher, a high school teacher, who's had very unorthodox methods for teaching. And went on the interview, walked in the room. Who was sitting there was Richard Donner. And so I said, "Oh wow, I haven't seen you in a while." And he's like, "Yeah." So I go, "So why am I here?" And he goes, "Oh, I was just telling these guys, I never met an actor who could cry on screen like you." I go, "Yeah, I guess I'm the crying baby or something type." And so he said, "Well, there's a scene in this. I need you to cry again. That's kind of why I asked for you." So I had about 4 or 5 minutes to look at the scene on the outer hallway because I just went in and met them, then went outside, got the sides, and came back in and had a cry on cue. And I guess I convinced them I could do it. And I got hired to play one of the school kids, a high school kid in this whose friend he just drops dead. Apparently had an aneurysm. He was on the baseball team, and I don't know if the ball struck him in the head or it just happened. And I'm emotionally disturbed through the whole thing because of what happened to him. And at the cemetery scene, the funeral scene, I'm one of the pallbearers. And then afterwards, I start laughing, which was kind of a weird reaction to have that has to turn into a cry. So it was very difficult, demanding in the sense you're starting out at one place where you can't deal with your emotions. And then David Hartman comes over and consoles me. And I tell him I never knew anybody that was dead before. And so anyway, yeah, I knew Dick literally my whole life. And the only problem with that one was it was a TV movie that it was the pilot. So they wanted me to be in the series and came back with them. It was a 7-year contract. And I had just quit doing My Three Sons a couple of years before that. And, that was 12 years. And I just couldn't imagine being tied up, for 7 more years. And then, like I said, I probably was the same thing that if I had done that series, it would have been whoever the sponsor was, you wouldn't have been able to do other TV work. And so I bowed out of it after the pilot. I just, I'll do the pilot. And then later, I think I did another TV pilot with George Kennedy. It was called Sarge. It was
Yeah.
also for Universal. Yeah, it was a pretty good idea. The guy was like a priest or cop. No, I guess he was a priest that became a cop. And, another murder mystery thing. And I was in that, and the same thing happened. They, wanted me to become part of the regular cast. And I think I'd had it by then with TV series. So I just figured I'd freelance. And by then, too, I had a production company. So I had a partner, and we just kind of wanted to shoot stuff and edit. And yeah, that's where my brain was.
And the ironic thing is, Stan, is that the beauty of TV and being able to show reruns is My Three Sons would garner a new audience every decade. I felt like now
Yes, yeah, that's the
I
crazy.
wasn't alive when the show was on the air, so I got to see the reruns. That's when I got to follow the show. And one of the things, Stan, that disappointed me a little bit, and you tell me like what happened here, but when TV Land brought My Three Sons on in 1998, they'd added it to their program, and for whatever reason, they never showed the black and white episodes. They just
Yeah,
showed season 6 and on, and I know those ones were a lot popular than the black and white ones, but I
yeah,
think people sometimes forget how underrated the first 5 seasons were, because I loved him as the big brother Mike. I thought he was tremendous.
yeah.
And why do you think they never gave enough recognition to those first 5 seasons?
Well, I think they did. You're too young to remember this, but before there was TV Land, there
Yeah,
was Nick at Night,
and they
and
did
Nick
do
at
it.
Night
Yes.
spawned TV Land. Nick at Night was, it started at midnight and ran to about 6 in the morning, and was only black and white. They didn't show the color episodes at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people got introduced, and this is a lot later because the show ended in, I guess the last episode was
72.
probably shown
Yeah.
72, I think, so, or 73, I can't remember. And immediately went into daytime syndication. So it was played, at least once, if not more than once, on CBS during the daytime period from 72, 73, all the way to 1985,
Yeah. Yeah.
when they came up with this idea, hey, why don't we do, or it wasn't them, it was the guy, Sumner Redstone, owned this company, and they decided it was cheap. CBS didn't think there was any value in old black and white TV shows. That's why they didn't show them. It was the wide world of color then, and by now it was far enough away from the original air dates that they thought, well, maybe people would watch these. We'll try, an all-night audience. They created Nick at Night, and that's what they did. They took, well, it was what, 6 hours of programming, so 12 different shows because they were about a half hour each, and they put them
Oh,
on at night, and it just was like wildly successful beyond whatever they thought would happen. But that spawned another audience that ran for 10 years at night like that, and
right.
then somebody had the great idea to say, well, if this is working so well at night, why aren't we doing this 24 hours a day? Let's create another network, call it TV Land, and we'll do that. And then when they introduced TV Land, that's when they kind of extended it out and started running not only the black and whites, but they also would cycle through all the color episodes as well. And yeah, it was good for them. There's 380 episodes. So you had, even if you ran it once a day for, you had more than enough for an entire year there. And yeah, it was really easy to do that, especially with our show. You could cycle through all those, never have to see one of them twice, and go out 380 weeks. And there were a lot of other shows out there that had quite a few episodes in backlog. So might have had a couple hundred episodes. I don't know what the bottom line on that was, or I think they probably only took shows that maybe had 100 or more episodes, so they could show them over and over and over. Yeah, TV Land ran them for another 10 years, and after that, they sort of cut it loose and allowed people to license it again. So after that, it was on, I know it was on the Hallmark Channel, the Odyssey Channel. It was like,
I think
maybe,
Me TV, maybe.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Made TV is where it's at now. That's been our home for probably almost going on 10 years. And I guess they've had pretty good success with it. And yeah, they've been showing it every day. So, we're talking about a show that's been on the air since 1960, so 40, 50, 60,
Yeah.
63 years. That's totally amazing. I mean, you're like 10 years old. It's like 53 years later, you're still watching the same show, which I
And I
guess I
mean,
should be honored by that.
and the episodes, I mean, were so well written. And like I said, I mean, we got to see these kids mature, grow up. Because if you remember in the first 5 seasons, the character Robbie, he was kind of immature. He was the middle brother. He would fight with Mike a lot, argue and stuff.
Yeah,
And then when Robbie became the older brother, he really matured. And Ernie and
yeah,
Chip leaned on him a lot. And then Chip kind of became that middle character where he would kind of have to guide Ernie, but Ernie would annoy him sometimes. So you got to see like these kids just grow up on this show. And what I really loved is yes, I know like Don left after season 11, but
Mhm.
he was on it long enough where like it was okay for him to move on. But everybody kind of stayed on that show. Tim was just too old at that point. Like he was off to like college and stuff.
Mhm.
And he, you understood why he kind of had to leave the show. But everybody stayed on that show, and even Fred, Fred, because if Fred didn't stay on, the show obviously doesn't work. And if one of the boys leaves, that show's doomed.
Yeah, well, that almost happened because when Tim left, it was sort of like, well, wait a minute, it's called My Three Sons. What do we do? And obviously, they had to concoct something in a hurry. And somebody went, well, what about this guy? He's already here, Stan's younger brother. What if he was a foster child? We'll just adopt him. And now we're back to My Three Sons again with
Yeah,
Ernie, Chip, and Robbie. So that did happen. Bill Frawley left the show, just before that, due to ill health, and was replaced by William Demarest. And
yeah,
then, because we were all getting older, they had to add a few women in there, or there would have been questions. So we all were getting married. Robbie got married, Steve got married,
yeah.
I got married. And then, the show just kind of turned the page and became a little bit different than what it was. But, people still were, excuse me, interested in following, the episodes. I almost left the last year, the same year Don did. My
Yeah.
contract expired too, and I thought, should I come back or not? And I got an offer actually from, I think it was the Virginian. They wanted to create another character and have me come on it, and I was like kind of excited about that at first because I thought, wow, I could be seen another way, and this wouldn't be like a modern, sitcom. So I really would be, maybe I could even have a beard or whatever. And I gave serious thought about, jumping ship, and I didn't in the end. It just, God, talk about a thing on crisis of conscience. Turned out I didn't want to leave the show and decided to just go down with the ship if it was going down. So I stayed for that 12th year, and it turned out that was the last year anyway. And it turned out it was the last year for the Virginian. So even had I gone to the Virginian, I would have been ungainfully unemployed the following year. So,
So let me ask you this, and this is more if you're a fan watching this show, not who you enjoyed working more with. But if you're a fan of the show, did you prefer Bub or Uncle Charlie?
well, they were both great guys, both off stage and on. I mean, Bill Demarest was probably, in terms of feature films, the bigger actor. I mean, he was
Yeah,
the quintessential second banana on so many great feature films, all the Preston Sturges movies he did. And he was a huge, huge, movie star, even though he was a B actor. He never was the lead actor, but he was always the best friend of the lead actor, or the detective trying to catch the lead actor.
right.
Bill Frawley, I didn't know much of his movie. I'd seen him in movies, so I knew who he was. But where I knew him from was I Love Lucy. That was my introduction to
Yeah,
Bill Frawley, and of course, I loved him on that show. And found out when he was coming onto the show, uh, this guy that I loved, and I made it my mission to make him my surrogate grandfather, and he obliged me.
yeah. I mean, he was great, and that's the thing too. I never really felt like there was a bad episode on that show. I know a lot of times the critics will say the shows eventually jumped the shark, but I thought like the producers, the writers, they did a great job as time went on when they had to go with the times and
Hmm.
change with the times. They did a great job with these characters. These characters to me never really got stale. And for you, Stan, it had to be maybe when you were a kid you didn't appreciate it as much, but looking back on it, it had to be a great moment for you to be able to work with your brother every day.
Yeah, that was nice. I mean, we didn't even think twice about it because we'd actually worked together before, and we were never in competition because I was 3 years older than him and probably a
Yeah,
foot and a half taller. But we actually worked together on Rally Round the Flag Boys. He was hired to play my younger brother on that, and
yeah,
the first day we were shooting,
yeah, yeah.
something happened with my brother's eyes, and by
Right.
noon they fired him, and I had a new brother by 1 o'clock. So that was a brutal welcome to show business moment. And then the very last episode of Ozzie and Harriet that I did, Barry was in it and played my brother on that. And, he did a good job eating ice cream. So Ozzie had him back. He replaced me, really. After I left the show, I had sort of become his go to neighborhood kid. And Ozzie wrote some episodes specifically for me to be in. And they did the same thing for Barry. I know there was one called The Little House Guest that, they wrote for Barry to be in and to star in. And, that's how generous he was with his show. We weren't Nelsons, but he welcomed us into the fold. And without Ozzy, again, my career would have gone nowhere. So same thing for Barry. It was a huge thing.
And I really think about the kid, the TV shows that had the child actors who played a big part in the success of those shows. And I think of Leave It to Beaver, and I think of obviously My Three Sons, and obviously Ozzie and Harriet. Though the kids are so instrumental in the success of those shows, which just goes to show you that kids are just as invaluable as adults are in shows, because without the kids and them doing what they need to do, it doesn't work.
No, it really doesn't. I mean, from a dramatic standpoint, but there's also, from the business side, we are the people bringing in the demographic of children, to children's eyeballs to the screen. They're not there to watch the adult. They're there to watch, people their own age, which are kids or teens. So that was our job. But yeah, that's what a lot of my friends did. Well, Jay did it on Dennis the Menace, of which when that show was being cast, it was between me, Jay, and I think the other guy was named Stanley Fafara, who was kind of a working child
Played
actor
Whitey,
back
I
then.
think, right?
Yeah, I think he eventually
Leave
played
It to
Whitey.
Beaver. Yeah.
Right, so we were all in competition to get that part, and I didn't get it. I mean, I was crushed, but thank God it didn't happen,
Yeah.
My career would have been over like Jay's at like 14, 15 when he kind of outgrew the part. But Jay, he worked. He did other TV shows. He did some movies afterwards and just kind of chose. I think he had some inner demons too from, being involved in show business, either, with his parents or mom and some aunts and uncles. And, it sounds like he may have suffered worse fate than I did. My parents were great. I had Ozzie and Harriet for my parents. They were just like Ozzie and Harriet. So we really lucked out, Barry and I. But I knew all those kids, and most of them had fairly good experiences. Paul Peterson from Don Richo, I knew him from very young age. Tommy Kirk, who was one of the big child actors and teen actors for Disney, was a friend, and I knew him most of his life and my life. Tim Considine,
great actor.
Some other kids. Yeah, Billy Gray was on Father Knows Best. Butch Patrick from the Munsters, we all kind of knew each other or knew of each other. Eventually over the years, we've got a clique going.
And Stan, one of the episodes I enjoyed was when Chip was trying to play baseball. He was struggling a little bit, and then he gets on base, and I think Steve, the father, is the umpire, and Chip slides home and he thinks he's made it. He's like, I did it. I'm safe or whatever. And Steve calls him out. And I just love that episode because you learn that like the father had to do the right thing. He had to make the right call. And it was a learning lesson for Chip. That was one of my favorite episodes. Do you have an episode that stands out to you at all, though?
I do. But, the funny part about this episode is it really didn't star any of the family members. I mean, we were all in it. The star of it was Tramp.
Yeah.
There's a show the first year. The title of it is called Small Adventure. I think it's like the 13th episode or something, and it was all about Tramp. He goes wandering off, out of the house on a Saturday afternoon, and he goes, wandering around the neighborhood and kind of off into this obscure area where they're doing some demolition work. He finds a stick of dynamite, the percussion dynamite, and picks it up thinking it's a dog bone, and brings it back into the house. And this stick of dynamite could literally go off at any second.
Yeah.
And, it's falling down the stairs and people are almost stepping on it. And I mean, it is such a nail biter, and, you're hanging on the edge of your seat. And, this is just a family TV show, but what an unusual subject matter to pick, and it's so well crafted and so spine chilling that this piece of dynamite could blow the entire house up. I mean, it's like blowing up whole hillsides, one stick of dynamite. And I just thought that was, just showed creativity to me on the show, that they could do shows, and we were just sort of the incidental players in it. And that episode just always stuck in my mind as being one of the best shows, because you really remembered it if you saw it and paid attention. And the fact that it didn't star anybody in particular. I mean, most of the episodes, my favorite episodes are the ones in the beginning, the first year till probably about the fourth year, I guess, the black and whites, and the ones particularly that starred William Frawley. They were just, I thought the writing was exceptional back then, and they really had tapped into the characters. We had a director, originally a gentleman named Peter Tewksbury, who actually came to us. He was the director of Father Knows Best. He was a really sensitive guy, and I mean, he just really knew what he was doing, and he was meticulous about everything. I think the first year when he was there was the only year we actually had a lot of rehearsals, and would rehearse scenes in between and have table reads of scenes before we'd actually go out and do it. And, he really wanted you to perform and do really well and make it really realistic. Unfortunately, from the production standpoint, from the production matters, I've heard John, who was the production manager and producer of our show, later say, this guy Peter shot more film in the first year than we shot the other 11 years. So that'll tell you how meticulous he was. So he didn't come back, but what he did is he set the tone of the show. That's what's unusual about My Three Sons, is that tone between, really being dramatic, but kind of light comedy woven in there, not, Three Stooge comedy or anything like that. But it really, I mean, it was very unusual, I thought, and especially when I look back on it. And I think that's the reason the show worked, that we were able to keep that tone, even though Peter was gone for 4 or 5 years. It seemed to change after Tim Considine left the show. Bill Demers came in, and they're probably, the scripts I don't think were quite as good. We probably had different writers. There's a lot of factors involved in that. But the
Also
early
changed
stuff
networks
was
too, which I think when you
good.
change networks, that's a little, adjustment. But you're one of the few shows, when you think about it, that changed networks and had a long run, because usually when you change the network, you maybe last 1 or 2 more years, one if you're lucky.
Yeah, it's usually a sign of the times, and your demise is right up the road. We actually shot more on, I guess it was CBS, than we did on ABC. So that was interesting. But besides Tim leaving and Bill Frawley leaving and Bub coming in, Tim Considine leaving and Barry coming in, we also went to color, which is this whole, you don't think about it that much, but color really impacts the way people watch TV, especially back then. And although it was an advancement, in our case, I thought the shows are better in black and white. They just have a different, older feeling to them. And, it's almost like if you go to Disneyland, when you're walking down that main street, it has that small town feel. I mean, the crazy part was, if you watch episodes of My Three Sons, even though this was supposed to be a small town in the Midwest called Bryant Park, we had everything there, corporate buildings, international airports that would take you to Hawaii or Ireland. It's kind of ludicrous, but, people didn't think about that stuff then.
And you talked about Nick at Night. I always thought what was great was when they showed the black and white episodes. It was Friday nights on Nick at Night, and if you're a young kid who's 11 or 12 years old and you want to stay up late, My Three Sons, Donna Reed, Father Knows Best, all these shows were on at Nick at Night, and you're getting to watch it in black and white. So it kind of has that night feeling to it as well. You're just sitting in your living room. And I always enjoyed that. So I do prefer to, not that the colored episodes, weren't great, but I always thought the black and white ones were awesome. They were the best.
They were great. They also did some other things that were very subtle, and I don't know how aware people are, but I'm sort of proud of that too, that, we had some sort of form of social awareness back in the early 60s that other shows did not have. But if you look at the episodes, there's some black actors working in it, and they're in there, and they're not janitors, or
Yeah.
like help coming into the house. There's a scene with Steve where he is at work as an aeronautical engineer, and it looks like he's working for Lockheed because they always showed the Lockheed, what was originally the Skunk Works building out of Burbank Airport.
Yeah.
And this other, aeronautical engineer walks in and he's black.
Yeah.
There's no mention that he's black, nothing. It's just another guy walks in and Steve has a conversation with him and he leaves. But, that probably made an impression on people in those days that maybe they didn't realize that, we were using black actors and, putting them in, not jobs where they were, disrespecting them in any way. Like they were just like us. There's a couple scenes where I'm in school and I know at least one or two of the other students and they were black. Or even in real life, when I went to school in Hollywood at Vine Street Elementary School, I never saw a black kid the whole time from first to sixth grade. First black kid I ever saw in school was in high school. It just, you go, wow, what's wrong with this? But yeah, my three sons, we had that. Well, we even had it on our crew, which did cause a problem. They brought a black guy, a black crew member in one year, and there was almost like a mutiny. And that's why this guy, I have so much respect for him. And he was one of my mentors. He's one of the guys listed in the credit as production manager. His name was John Stevens, and he was really the producer of the show. If that title had been around then, he would have been called a line producer. And he just made sure the show functioned on a day-to-day basis, and whatever problems came up, no matter what it was, he handled it. Whether it was the actors, the directors, writing problems, whatever, he would get it resolved. But yeah, our crew balked. They came to him and said, "We're not working with that guy." And John said, "Really? Why?" And they said, we don't want a black actor." And I said, he's like, "Really?" And he says, "Well, I'll tell you what. If you don't want to work with him, don't work with him. We're going to be breaking from lunch at 12. You let me know by 12:30, and I will have a whole new crew here." And he said, "If you decide to stay, I never, ever want to have this conversation again. And I don't want to hear anything behind anybody's back." So,
Well, that's,
yeah, I thought
that's a
that
great
was,
job. That's a
he
great
did
job
a
by
great job.
him. That's a great job by him by putting him in his place and letting
Yeah, he
him
put
know
up.
that it doesn't matter what
Yeah,
color
we
you
weren't going
are.
to put up with any of
Yeah.
that. Yeah, yeah, which I
Yeah.
thought
I
was
mean,
pretty
that's
amazing.
amazing.
But it also taught those guys. And the guy was there, and he became a beloved crew member along with the other guys. You just have to open your mind and your heart, and it's hard to believe, a Hollywood soundstage crew could be like that, but it was just not done, and you're bucking, 40, 50 years of that kind of pervasive racism, that came down to our set.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was glad he did that. And, that guy had my respect my whole life. He just passed away a couple of years ago, but we were very close friends, and I credit him with everything that I know on the other side of the camera, not the acting, but the production side, is all due to John Stevens. Taught me everything I needed to know about scheduling and production and editing and scheduling problems and you name it. I mean, this guy had handled every situation you could think of. Well, he went on from My Three Sons when it ended up, going off the air to Gunsmoke. He did the last couple of years of Gunsmoke. Then he went over to MGM and produced the couple of years of How the West Was Won when it was a TV series. And then he did Simon and Simon. And then he created a show called Major Dad. And that was, he created it and was the executive producer. But he was just the most low key guy. And I tried to model myself after him. I just thought, what a great way to handle people. He's firm but polite, but no BS, no bullshit, man. This guy was just straight up, straight shooter, and that's worked for me. God bless you, John, wherever you are.
Right. That really is a great job by him. And like you said, you learned so much from him. So let me ask you, Stan, what projects do you have upcoming that we can look forward to?
Well, I've got a project I've been working on for a long time, it seems like, but it's kind of gone through some iterations. Anyway, I created this program for actors. It's actually a series. It's like an 8-part series, and what it is, it's called The Actor's Journey,
Yeah.
and it's a program for actors Not on acting at all. You can get that anywhere. It does, doesn't matter whether you live in New York, Los Angeles, or Pea Ridge, Arkansas. There's got to be an acting school there. And, or people learn acting in high school or college. The problem comes about when you graduate and you're ready to bring your developed talent that you spent, 4 years working on. Doesn't matter whether you spent $25,000 at some university or $100,000 at Yale or Harvard. You got the same problem. How do I get into the industry and bring this talent here that I've developed into it? What most actors are not told is our industry is a two-component business. That's no secret. So many businesses are. Uh, for instance, if you're going to open a restaurant, you may open it because you're very creative and you have recipes and you think you're the greatest chef in the world. But I tell you what, if you don't have the other component, meaning knowing how to run a restaurant from the administrative side and the business side, you're out of business very quickly, very
Right.
shortly, lose a lot of money. Acting is the same thing. You can have the craft down pat, but people come ready to knock on the door of show business, and show business, it couldn't care less about you. And it's like, how do I find my way into this thing that seems to have an impenetrable wall around it? And, I saw that for years because I knew a lot of people that, would come to LA or, were trying to become actors and they'd be ready to go. And I'd see him in plays and, I go, wow, this guy's really good. But he just he didn't know what to do to get in. And so I had kept thinking about, somebody should do a program for these people that really teach them what I thought was not what I thought, but what the consortium of actors that I knew thought was the business side of the industry. And if they could just place that in the hands of actors right at the inception of their career, kind of in that little gray area where they just finished college and are getting ready to knock on the door, you would have both components. And this would make life so much easier. Usually what happens is you finish and you spend the next 5, 10 years of your life trying to figure out the industry and how to get into it and what this means, what that means, or I made a mistake here. Now nobody wants to see me, or I
Right.
joined the union. Now I'm told I shouldn't have joined the union. So to, really spell all this stuff out. So I kept, like everybody else, saying, somebody should do something. Somebody should do something. Somebody finally said to me, well, you should do it. And I'm like, why should I do it? And they go, well, because you got a production company. You worked as a producer. You've worked as a director. You've worked in casting people. You've worked as an actor. Who better to do it? Plus, all these people. And I thought about it for a while, and I thought, well, maybe they're right. Let me put some feelers out, and I did. So basically, what I decided to do was bring 100 people from the entertainment industry. The requirement was that you had 20, 30 years on your belt of experience and success there, um, and bring it to this program. So I created what the program was, which covers about 65 different topics that are related to the business side of being an actor, not the 5 or 6 that they teach you in college, which is get a reel, get a resume, get some headshots, try and get in the Screen Actors Guild, and try and get an agent. And once you do that, you're done. Well, if it was that easy, everybody would be doing it. So I put this program together. We shot it, and I brought in 100 people from the entertainment industry, not just actors, but directors, producers, executive producers, showrunners, agents, managers, the president of the Screen Actors Guild at the time we shot, the president of the DGA at the time we shot, and they're the ones who teach the program. And their criteria was, like I said, they had to have 25, 30 years worth of experience doing it. I wanted them all to have some success that they were bringing to illustrate, what we were trying to illustrate with these particular topics that are related to the business. And over 50 of the people had been nominated for or had won Academy, Emmy, Golden Globe Awards. So they're recognized by the industry being the top in their profession. So that's what I did. Brought all these people in. We shot for, gosh, it was almost like 2 years because people were available and then not available, and I had to wait around, got them all together. Then it took me about over 2 years to edit it. Then I realized there were some components missing. Had to go back into production again, pick those up, get those done, edit it all in. and it eventually became a DVD program that was available. Well, it was available on DVD. So, yeah, we started selling those. And then I ended up moving, plus I was working and I couldn't handle the company. So we basically put everything on the back burner. Anyway, I'm right now trying to get it up. There's a website that's being created. It's offline right now till we finish it up. And then all the material that was originally on the DVD will now be available streaming media, and it'll give actors who are ready to start their careers and want to know what the hell they're doing to get into the industry and not make a lot of mistakes, or spend their money in places where they shouldn't spend it, or fall into the many potholes and detours along the way that just take you right out of the business. So anyway, it should be available probably in the next month or so. Where I'm just finished transcoding all the videos so that it can be put up, and then there'll be links to it from the website. And the program's called The Actor's Journey. The Actor's
The
Journey.
actors.
Yeah, if some people want to check it out, what I did do is I took some clips up so people can see some of the people that are in it and hear them speak on certain topics. Yeah, they're like maybe minute to 2 minute long clips, but we have a channel on YouTube called the Actor's Journey channel. So if you go there, there's probably about 40 or 50 clips with, in
Oh,
fact,
cool.
Richard Donner is one of the directors that was involved in it. Another guy named Jack Shea, who has directed every TV series known to man all through the 90s, I guess it's in the 80s. And he was also the president of the Directors Guild at the time we shot. People like Melissa Gilbert, Henry Winkler, Michael York were some of the actors. Sherman Hemsley. I mean, just tons of. They're all. I mean, that's part of the fun of watching the thing too. Is almost everybody teaching it is somebody you've heard of before, or if they're not a recognizable face, because if they're a director or producer, you may not know what they look like. But they are all qualified to be teaching this. And like I said, there are people that have won tons of Emmys and Oscars and Golden Globe Awards, which is where you want to be learning. A lot of people learn what they think is a business, but they're being taught usually by a teacher who became a teacher instead of becoming an actor. And yeah, he's probably giving you some information, but most of those guys are qualified to teach, but not to really give you the full experience of what it takes on the other component, which is this business side of being an actor, or all the non-performance skills you need to have, to jumpstart a career and perpetuate it and hopefully guide it towards success.
Well, Stan, we'll have to have you back on when that gets up and running because it'd be good to
Yeah.
talk about that. Spend a
Oh, I've got a lot
show
of
on
great
that.
stories
Yeah,
on this. Yeah, it's pretty amazing, some of the people and their stories. Well, that's why I picked them. They're all friends of mine, and I knew their stories, but it's the stories that illustrate the pitfalls and the hardships, or how people have broken into the industry, which is just, you'd say, God, that's ludicrous. But you know, uh, almost nobody comes through the door. Most of us come through the window, up through the floorboards, down the chimney, but that's how we get into the industry. And you got to be prepared to sometimes, go to extraordinary, means and methods. But, as long as you're polite and you're bringing something of use to the industry, it will accept you.
yeah, and I think what you're doing is great. Like I said, we'll have you back on when that gets up and running. But
Okay.
thank
Yeah, it'd be
you
great.
for giving me a few minutes today. And listen, think about your career. If you never did anything else, my three sons, people can see you in 380 episodes, and not a lot of people could say that in their career, but you could say that. I mean, you did 12 seasons, I mean, which is unbelievable. And then you've continued to work. You haven't rested on your laurels. So I really applaud you because you have had, in my book, a Hall of Fame career. So congratulations on that. And thank you for
Thank
giving me a
you.
few minutes today.
Well, I've been a lucky guy, and hard work's involved, but then there's still the matter of luck. But my feeling is you make your own luck. You have to learn how to make your own luck.
Well, I appreciate it again. Thank you again for coming on. And like I said, we'll have you back on. But I look forward to this new project. And thank you again for coming on.
Thanks for having me on. It's been fun.
I appreciate it. There you have it, folks. The one and only Stan Livingston for In the Spotlight. I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone.